Who remembers Evergreen State College? The college in Washington State that holds an annual Day of Absence. A Day of Absence, you ask? What's all that about? Well, it's a college-sponsored event where students of colour voluntarily stay at home for the day to remind white students how terrible life would be without them. Yeah, I bet some serious lessons were taught that day. But what could teach young white students a better lesson? What could really make white students understand social justice to a greater degree and make them truly value diversity and multiculturalism? The answer to that, according to Evergreen State College, is a day of presence. What is a day of presence, I hear you ask? Well, it's sort of like a day of absence, but in reverse. A day of presence is where white students and teachers are banned from the college campus and only students of colour and teachers of colour can use the facilities for the day. So a more accurate, but probably less friendly name would be a No Whites Allowed Day. And I bet that day taught everyone some important lessons. So how did this day of presence turn out? Well, for days, plural, the campus descended into anarchy. White students and teachers that did turn up were held in special rooms against their will, essentially as hostages, and were made to ask permission to use the toilets, at which point they would be escorted to the toilets by their captors. Police were blocked from entering the campus and intervening as gangs of students of colour roamed the campus, raising their fists, chanting Black Power, and shouting anti-white racist slurs. So the No Whites Allowed Day essentially turned into something much worse than simply barring white students and white teachers from coming onto the college campus. And this wasn't some nightmare scenario from a book. This wasn't the plot of a horror film. This was reality. This is what happened in May of last year as the progressive Evergreen State College showed its commitment to improving race relations. But maybe it was more than just a commitment to improving race relations. Maybe Evergreen State College did teach their students an important lesson. A lesson on what a world without those of European descent would actually be like. Maybe white students learned just how grim things would be if the liberals who push the cultural Marxist agenda get their way. Maybe this was actually a good thing. Maybe, just maybe, the lesson that Evergreen State College taught their young and impressionable students was that forced diversity, multiculturalism, and social justice weren't dreamt up to make life better, but were invented and initiated to destroy and undermine our Western civilization. Maybe the Evergreen State College fiasco will make many young people of European descent question what it would be like to live in a world where they are a minority. A world where mass immigration and multiculturalism has dispossessed them of the lands their forefathers founded and built. However, let's just take a step back for a second. Let's just take a moment to analyse the sentiment behind this ludicrous Day of Presence. Now, can you imagine if a school, college, or university held a similar day? A day where only white students were allowed onto the campus. A day that was used to celebrate ideas of whiteness, and where bands of white students roamed the campus, throwing up salutes and shouting white power. A day that banned people of colour from coming and using the facilities. Yeah, I don't think that idea would have been one that would have flown. In fact, had someone even as much as suggested that non-white students should be banned from attending campus for the day, they would have probably lost their job. They would have been splashed all across the mainstream media and been publicly hung out to dry, and they would have been made public enemy number one. Their life would have been ruined, and I doubt they would have ever worked in teaching again. And keep that last comment in the back of your mind, as we'll come back to that later. We will revisit the way that these so-called liberals treat those in the teaching profession who don't adhere to the politically correct narrative. But the suggestion that white people should be banned from campus for the day was not only a celebrated idea, but it was an idea that was put into practice. And this is where you see the immense double standards held by those within the liberal establishment. And these double standards aren't just an accident. They are not just a coincidence. The people who pushed and supported this day of presence, this anti-white poison, are committed to an agenda. And that agenda is dispossessing those of European descent from their birthright. And the ultimate extension of that is white genocide. You see, this day wasn't about equality or easing tensions between different groups of people. It was about pushing white guilt and making white students feel like they were less than others, as if they owed other students something because they were a different colour. This day was about making white students feel subservient, like second-class citizens. This event was about creating and fostering disharmony. But interestingly, the little experiment at Evergreen State College showed what might happen in the future, what might happen on a larger scale if whites do become a minority in their ancestral homelands. Not only will they become second-class citizens, but the genocide we speak of might not simply be a genocide of planned demographic change, as outlined in the UN definition of the word genocide. It might not be a slow and undignified process of being bred out. It might be something far more violent. I've talked about white genocide a lot before and made a video earlier this year called White Genocide Explained. It's a great starting point for those new to this topic and it's linked in the description below. But where else can you see examples of this happening? Where else can you see examples of white people becoming a minority? White people losing control of the nations their forefathers founded? Well, you only have to look to Zimbabwe, formerly named Rhodesia, and of course, South Africa. These are two nations, both founded by those of European descent, built by the hands of Europeans, and culturally rooted in the ways of Western civilization. And look what happened to South Africa and Zimbabwe. The same Western media and white liberals who cheered and celebrated when South Africa transitioned to black rule are now saying very little as the new progressive government passes laws to confiscate the land of the remaining white farmers. And what will happen when the last white farmer has been kicked off their land? Well, if the case of Zimbabwe is anything to go by, the people will starve. The nation will beg for Western foreign aid, and the quality of life will massively diminish for everyone. And what happened at Evergreen State was a microcosm of this. It was just a window to a future where those of European descent have become minorities, where those of European descent are no longer in control of their own destiny. And for that, I thank Evergreen State, because this is one social experiment that has backfired on the liberal establishment. You see, white students and teachers won't forget being forcibly locked in rooms and being told that they had to ask for permission to go to the toilet. They won't forget the humiliation of being walked to the bathroom in the way a felon being tried in a courtroom might be treated. But what had these students been found guilty of? What had they done to deserve this treatment? Well, they were the wrong colour. They were white. But why am I talking about this now? Why is this an issue a year later? Because the fallout from this day of presence at Evergreen State is still being felt, and felt in a big way. You see, this event has led to a massive drop in enrollment at Evergreen. In fact, Evergreen State has announced a 20% drop in new students, leading to a $6 million loss in funding. This has led to Evergreen State cancelling 20 faculty lines and closing the openings for 19 vacant staff positions, with the prospect of 20 already existing staff positions being cut in the future. So all of this social justice has just come around and bitten the establishment right on its backside. And it's hit them where it hurts, right on the bottom line. In fact, it's cost them $6 million in funding and potentially lost 20 existing staff members their jobs. And am I sorry about that? No, I'm not. Remember earlier this year when nationalist blogger Tiana Dalikoff was suspended from a school in Florida for daring to espouse opinions that went against those of the politically correct establishment? Remember how she was hounded by the media, the left, and the school gave her no support whatsoever? Remember how the media rejoiced when she effectively lost her job and how they tried to paint her as a threat to our young students, despite her having an exemplary record and being well liked at the school. And all of this media outrage was over one woman, a woman who didn't even bring her politics into the classroom, but simply talked online about her beliefs. Well, I didn't see the mainstream media calling for anyone to be sacked after the anti-white debacle at Evergreen State College. There were no calls by the usual suspects to defund the college, which for the record is state-funded, and by state-funded we mean paid for by the taxpayer. We didn't see calls to sack members of the staff who supported this racist day of presence. Again, this only shows the hypocrisy of the establishment. But the administration of Evergreen State got their just desserts. They got their comeuppance. Not from a concerted effort by the controlled media, but by the public. They got what was coming to them, and they got it from people power. These liberals wanted a day of absence, and then they wanted a day of presence. They wanted to discriminate against white students. They wanted to push social justice, to make white students feel guilty for merely existing. And then they presided over a situation where those white students who did have the audacity to turn up for lessons were forcibly held in a room against their will. And now these liberals are left with a $6 million shortfall in funding. They are left contemplating unemployment. But they aren't contemplating unemployment because of a campaign whipped up by the media or by pressure groups. These people are not losing their funding because it was taken away by the establishment or because liberal lobbyists have pressured crooked politicians into withdrawing it. These people are facing financial problems because of people power. Because the very people they rely on in order to maintain their funding have turned their backs and walked away from Evergreen State. So thank you, Evergreen State College. You taught tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of young people of European descent just what being a minority might look like for them. You showed America and the world how social justice, even on a small scale, leads to failure. You showed everyone that multiculturalism and diversity are just anti-white policies, and for your slavish devotion to those anti-white policies, you are now paying the price. But most of all, thank you for showing those of European descent that we can fight back, that we can make a difference, that if we stand together and if we work as one, we can beat you, we can defund you, and we can make our voice heard. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, please help spread the message by liking and sharing it on social networks. If you want to hear more from me, please hit the subscribe button, as new videos are posted every week. You can also read my book, The Fall of Western Man. It's available as a free ebook and in both hardback and paperback, and all the links are in the description below. Finally, if you want to join in the discussion with me, feel free to add me on Facebook and follow me on Twitter. Also, you can now follow me on Gab, mines and BitChute as well. Everyone's welcome.